Good evening, Your Excellencies, honorable speakers, distinguished guests. Welcome to the New York City Bar Association's 30th commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, remembering Rwanda and acknowledging the permanent intergenerational legacy of genocide. On behalf of my United Nations Committee co-chairs, Irvin Nina and Sophie Mershkovsky-Roma, thank you for joining us tonight. April 7th is the International Day of Reflection on the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. April has also been designated as Genocide Awareness Month. And today we reflect on the 30th anniversary of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda and honor the mourning period for the 1 million innocent men, women, and children who were mercilessly murdered in just 100 days. This remembrance program will commemorate and draw on lessons from the genocide. Panelists will discuss transitional and reparative justice responses to the genocide, intergenerational transmission of trauma, and ways to mitigate trauma-related intergenerational effects, as well as sexual violence as a weapon of genocide and climates of hate as precursors to ethnic violence and genocide. The panel includes survivors of this genocide who will share their testimonies about surviving genocide and their lives since. Tonight's speakers include moderator Jacqueline Murakate, survivor and founder of the Genocide Survivors Foundation and an attorney here in New York. Panelists Console Nishimwe, survivor, author of Tested to the Limit, global human rights activist. Dr. Sophia Mershkovsky-Roma, co-chair of the United Nations Committee, the New York City Bar Association, and Dr. Michelle Sanders, a licensed psychologist, co-founder of the Female Advocacy Foundation International, advisory board member, and co-chair of the Yazidi Working Group, International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. We also have an honorary United Nations speaker, Alice Weramu-Dernitu, of the United Nations Undersecretary and Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. Welcome, Undersecretary. Welcome. And our closing keynote remarks will be by His Excellency Ernst Ramucho, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Rwanda to the United Nations. We would like to thank the following sponsors and co-sponsors that made this evening possible: the United Nations Committee, the African Affairs Committee, the Council on International Affairs, and the co-sponsoring organizations, FAFI, Genocide Survivors Foundation, and the Garden of Avant-Garde Film and Theatrical Foundation. In the spring of 1994, I was a second-year law student when the genocide against the Tutsi unfolded. As we studied for our law exams here in the New York area, my fellow law students and I watched in horror as the violence erupted in Rwanda, and we were angered as the United States and other influential countries sat on the sidelines and failed to timely intervene to stop the genocide. 5 years ago, I had the honor of meeting Console and Jacqueline. Over the years, they have become dear colleagues. I've had the honor of listening to their and fellow survivors' stories as they contend with the genocide's legacy, the profound sense of loss, and the mental, emotional, and psychological anguish they often feel, and the burden survivors bear. I, like so many colleagues, admire their courage and commitment to supporting their community and other similarly situated communities, and their determined dedication to wrap others in love. Their work is truly extraordinary, and they should be commended for it. In planning tonight's program, they and other survivors have expressed the pain of genocide, that it seems to grow heavier over time. A partial explanation for this is noted by Mark Wallen in his book, It Didn't Start With You. We are coming to better understand how the trauma of genocide is transmitted from one generation to the next. As one survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi stated, "I carry the genocide as baggage in my heart." Such trauma are bricks in the backpacks of the next generation and can become part of their DNA. Lemanuel Bitsu, a Navajo PhD researcher associate in genetics at Harvard University, believes that epigenetics research is finally beginning to provide substantial evidence that intergenerational trauma is a real phenomenon. Wallen points out that Native American youths, like the children of war veterans, like the children of Holocaust survivors, like the children of Cambodian genocide survivors, and like the children of the World Trade Center attack survivors, are among the modern world's newest victims of transgenerational trauma. He notes, alarmingly, the list keeps expanding. Genocide and other atrocity crimes, war and oppression continue to sow the seeds of generational reliving as survivors unknowingly transmit what they have experienced to successive generations. He specifically states, case in point, many people born after 1994 in Rwanda, too young to have witnessed the senseless killings, experience the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress as those who witnessed and survived the brutality. The young Rwandans report feelings of intense anxiety, obsessive visions similar to those horrors that occurred well before they were born. It is a phenomenon that was expected. All that is not said is transmitted. Even children whose families were unscathed by the violence are similarly affected by what a psychiatrist refers to as a contagion in the collective subconscious. Our panel will explore these ideas and more this evening. Healing and lessening this trauma within the Tutsi survivor community and others in Rwanda are our work now. Our formal program will follow by a candle lighting ceremony. We hope you will stay for that. We will now have a minute of silence in honor of the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and then our panel will begin. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. I'd now like to ask Jacqueline to come to the podium.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, fellow survivors, fellow members of the Rwandan community here in New York. I want to begin by thanking each and every one of you for being with us this evening as we commemorate for the 30th time the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Tonight, I'm truly honored to moderate today's program. And I want to begin by thanking the New York City Bar Association, all the sponsoring committees that Catherine has already mentioned, the NYC Bar staff, all the individuals who helped to make this evening program possible. And I want to personally extend my deepest gratitude to Catherine Van Kampen. I want to thank you for your wonderful welcome remarks. I want to thank you for the time and effort and resources that you have put in making this evening's program possible. Because Console and I and Michelle and Sophia know that tonight's event would not have happened without Catherine's effort. And thank you for all you do, not only for the Rwandan community, but for other communities that have lived through genocide and other mass atrocity crimes. Catherine works with Holocaust survivors. She has done a lot of work with the Yazidi community. She's a champion of human rights, for women's rights, and for female empowerment, both as an individual and through her organization, the Female Advocacy Foundation International, was FAFI. So please, before anything else, I just want to say that your effort did not go unnoticed, and we are deeply grateful. Dear friends, as Catherine mentioned, today is a solemn, it's an emotionally difficult day, particularly for those of us who lived through the horrors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. But it is also a critically important day, because as we come together for the 30th year to commemorate and reflect on that genocide, a genocide which, as you heard, although it lasted for 100 days, over 1 million innocent men, women, and children were murdered, including my own family, Console's family, as you hear today. And though it has been 30 years since the genocide, myself and many survivors who you will speak to today and outside of these walls will tell you that it is hard to believe that it's been 30 years, because the horrific memories associated with those 100 days of darkness, the murder of our loved ones, those images, those memories are still very vivid. Memories and images of murder, of rape, and of torture. Memories of betrayal and a sense of abandonment by the then Rwandan government, which planned and executed the genocide. Betrayal and abandonment by our neighbors, by our teachers, by those who we had previously considered friends, even by our Sunday school teachers, priests, and pastors, who we thought would try and protect us, only to find them being among the machete-bearing killers who hunted us day and night as if we were animals, with one goal and one goal in mind: the extermination of all Rwanda's Tutsis and anyone else who was opposed to that genocidal plan. When the genocide happened, I was 9 years old. Prior to the genocide, I had lived a relatively happy childhood. I had my parents, I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, I had many aunts, I had many uncles, and like any other 9-year-old child, I had goals and I had dreams. But when the genocide began, I found myself being forced to leave my home. I found myself in an environment where I had to hide every day in hopes of surviving. I found myself in an environment where I watched every day and night as relatives, my Tutsi neighbors, Tutsi friends, were being hunted and brutally murdered for no other reason other than their Tutsi ethnicity, which at that time was considered a crime deserving of death. When the genocide ended, I found myself a traumatized orphan who was told that while I was one of the few who survived that genocide, neither my parents, all 6 siblings, and most of my extended family members had been as fortunate. With respect to my immediate family, I'll come to learn that one day during the genocide, my Hutu neighbors had dragged my parents, my 4 brothers and 2 sisters, my grandmother, my paternal uncle, all the Tutsis in our village, and they had taken them to a nearby river called the Nyabarongo River, where many Tutsis were taken to be killed during the genocide. And at that river, my entire immediate family was murdered, one by one, and their bodies were thrown in that same river. Today, there is no tombstone for my family and for the families of the many genocide orphans and widows who survived. There is no tombstone where we can go and remember our loved ones. Like many survivors, I was denied the opportunity to bury my loved ones and to bury them with the dignity that they deserve, as they were thrown in rivers in my case, and for many others, they were thrown in mass graves, in latrines, in swamps, and other places where even 30 years later, their remains are still being found. Today, 30 years later, Rwanda has come a long way in rebuilding, as you hear today. And survivors as a community have also achieved many successes which should be celebrated, as Catherine mentioned. That said, even 30 years later, challenges also remain, as you'll hear from our panel discussion today. The loss of our loved ones and the pain and trauma associated with our inhumane experiences remain an indelible part of our lives. In our everyday life, survivors' healing journey is constantly being interrupted. A sense of smell while we walk down the street, which reminds us of our childhood. A piece of clothing when we go shopping, which reminds us of something that our loved one used to wear. Or a phone call that we may at any time get from a loved one in Rwanda telling us that remains of one of our loved ones have been found. Because even to this day, many of the people who participated in the genocide have refused to tell survivors where they dumped the bodies of their loved ones after they killed them. Our healing journey is also constantly being interrupted by those who seek to deny or to revise the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi and to ignore the historical truth that surrounded it. As Catherine mentioned, today we're going to reflect on that genocide. As we hear from the various speakers that you hear from today, I ask that we engage in this moment of reflection, remembrance, not in a way that is passive, that we do not passively remember the genocide against the Tutsi. We know that remembrance is good in and itself, but it's even more important to actively remember by making sure that what happened in 1994 in Rwanda is not a crime. The crime of genocide is not a crime that continues to happen. As we commemorate for the 30th year, our hearts are extra heavy given the state of the world today. As we are all aware, whether it's through our TV screen, our computer screens, our phone screens, newspapers, or media news, we are living in a very dark time. A time of hate and extremism, a time where hate and extremism motivated violence is taking place in many parts of the world. I don't have to go through the list. You are all well aware that we are living in a time, a dangerous and dark time, a time of high levels of disinformation, of high levels of polarization, a time where friends are quickly becoming enemies or turning into quote-unquote enemies because they disagree on certain things, a time where students are feeling unsafe to go to school, a time when even places of worship are having to put up extra security for people to feel safe as they worship. Over the past few months, and given the realities that we have all witnessed in the world, I have prayed and continue to pray that each of us can meet this moment of immeasurable pain and fear in the world with empathy and compassion for all who are suffering, and never with denial or justification. So most importantly, I pray that we can all meet this moment of darkness in the world with a commitment to fighting hate and extremism that enable the crime of genocide to take place. I want to thank our panelists, our distinguished panelists, for being with us tonight. Each and every one of them is going to contribute in many ways to our conversation today. And I want to say that we are truly honored to have each and every one of you. And we thank you for your support and your solidarity today as we remember our loved ones. Each panelist is going to speak for about 10 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. And then after that, we're going to have a brief conversation. And as Catherine mentioned, at the conclusion of the panel discussion, we're going to have the honor of hearing from our ambassador here at the UN, as well as the special advisor, the UN special advisor on the prevention of genocide. So we're going to start with Console. I'm now going to be reading all the bios for the speakers. Catherine has already introduced them, and you have all the bios in your programs. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the bio. I'm just going to say a word or two about each of the speakers. So our first speaker tonight is a dear friend of mine. She's like a sister, a God-given sister that God has given me after losing my own sisters. Console Nishimwe, she's an author. You'll see her books. They are displayed in the back, so I encourage you to get a copy and read her story. But she's an author. She's a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, as you hear. She has spent many years tirelessly sharing her story, a story where she speaks not only for herself, but for many young men, young women, and who were murdered and tortured during the genocide against the Tutsi. So Console, I'm going to invite you to give your brief remarks, and thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us to commemorate the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. I would love to thank Catherine. Thank you so much. And the team and everyone here, really, it means a lot for us to be here. Thank you all for being here. To fellow survivors in the room, in Kinyarwanda we say more. So we are together today. Thank you for coming to honor the memories of our loved ones we've lost during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. When the genocide happened, I was a young teenager, 14 years old, happily living with my both parents who were teachers. And we were 5 children. I was the oldest in my family. I had a sister and my 3 younger brothers who were age 14, I was 14. My sister 11, my 3 younger brothers were age 9, 7, 16 months old. During that period, before the genocide, I was happy both with my family. We had a beautiful family. We lived in the western province of the country in a place called Kibuye, in a town called Rwanda. So I would say that my family was a beautiful family. I was very fortunate to have on both sides, on my mom and dad, a big family. Like any other child, like Jacqueline said, I looked forward to going to my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, so happy. So, but everything cut short during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. I found myself and my family going into hiding for 3 months, not knowing what would happen, not knowing if I would survive. During that period, in 3 months, I had to face unimaginable horrors at that age, where I had to see people that I knew very well, neighbors, doing horrible things to us. There were people who came to our home people my parents taught to their children, people that I met in church, they were not strangers to me. So, and during that period, in 3 months hiding, many horrible things happened. People called killers on us when we went to seek refuge in their home. Either they would do horrible things to us instead of help. As a young teenager, I couldn't understand. My little brain could not understand how people's hearts completely changed when in my household I was taught to love everyone and to be polite and to everyone. So now the adults are doing the opposite of what I have been taught in my household. So, and during that period, in 3 months, we hid in a very difficult circumstances. I remember the first week, the second week of the April 15th, where we were found hiding in the bushes with my dad, my siblings, and my paternal aunt, who happened to be my dad's sister, and seeking refuge, another home. And the time, that was the time I separated from my dad. So my dad was murdered by killers who followed him, and he learned how they tortured him in a most horrible way. So, and we kept hiding, me, my mom, my siblings, and my mom had to carry my younger brother, who was 16 months old, on her back. It was a rainy season, and it was not easy. We're hungry most of the time. And during that period also, where we're hiding, my brothers also were taken by a neighbor who was someone who grew up with my mother, someone I knew very well. And other killers, they took them to our already destroyed home and slaughtered their bodies and threw them in a septic tank of our home. And between the time my dad was killed and to the time in May 9th, my brothers were killed, we had to go through unimaginable horrors, seeking refuge in homes of people and not helping us, instead of calling killers on us, hiding in the bushes in the sorghum plantations, every place we could find to hide. And at the time, when my brothers were taken to be killed, we all asked to be taken, but they had to leave us as women. And because they wanted to decide when they want to kill us. And around that time, it was not easy for my mom. We didn't want to hide anymore. As you can imagine, a mother who was carrying a little boy being snatched away from her, and to see little boys being taken like lambs to be slaughtered. Imagine what she felt. And we kept hiding, but it was not easy. Where we're hiding, like during the genocide against the Tutsi, rape was used as a weapon. That's why many women and girls were not killed right away. They had to be tortured and raped in the most horrible way. Many of you have learned how it happened. Some were raped by several killers, gang raped. Others were raped, kept in the most horrific way. And that's the reason why they didn't want to kill us right away, me and my mom and my sister. Where we're hiding, I was taken by a neighbor who came where we're hiding and took me from my mom and my sister because we're powerless. This man of the household didn't help. And I was snatched from them, and I was dragged to my mom asking, pleading to not take me, to kill all of us if they want to kill us, all of us. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so the man dragged me on the street, beat me with the back of the sword, and was taken by him not too far from our already destroyed home, and was raped by him. And he thought many people would come, other killers, and torture me more, like how many other girls and women were being tortured. And I found myself, I managed to leave that place, dragged myself back to where we're hiding, and my mom and the women of the household took care of my injuries. Huh. Imagine what my mother felt. Not too long ago, she lost her precious boys, and now she had to see what I've gone through. It was not easy. I want to die. I want to be killed. But somehow when you survive, things keep happening. So later on, of course, we kept going other places. We found at the end someone in a Muslim community hid us for the remainder of the genocide. That's how we're able to survive. And this man didn't murder anybody, didn't participate in the genocide. There were people who were so kind enough to never allow themselves to commit the genocide. That man was one among the few who have done that. So he helped us until we survived, and he protected us. And then my mom, it was now my mom and my sister who survived, the three of us. And on both sides, my grandparents were murdered, my uncles and aunts. On my dad's side, everyone was murdered. We are only few grandchildren who survived. On my mom's side, luckily, there are a few cousins and other few people who survived. Many of the men in our family were murdered. It was hard for me to never had that person. My dad was my best friend. To have that male figure, to be a dad, to be a big brother, when you had someone who cared very much and you don't have that anymore. It was very hard for me. And now, like I said earlier, how rape was used as a weapon, many women and girls had to live with the consequences. Thankfully, with RPF, that stopped the genocide. That's why I'm here. That's why I survived, me and Jacqueline. Now, but we had to live with the consequences of what we have gone through, like many girls and women who were raped. And some live with HIV, others have had children from rape, and other psychological trauma because of what they have endured. I had to live with a trauma, severe trauma, like anyone else, trying to think how my life was going to be. Later on, I found out like I was HIV positive as a result of the rape. It was not easy as a young woman to now to live with something that constantly reminds you of what you have gone through. It was not easy. I was among many. At least I had a mom to lean on her shoulder. Many of my fellow survivors didn't have parents, didn't have any siblings like Jacqueline. At least, even though my mom carried a lot of pain of what you have gone through, including her own pain, but at least I can lean on her shoulder. So that really gave me comfort, pushed me to never give up. So despite the fact that I tried even though I tried so hard to move on, I lived with the trauma within. And my mom told me that, she showed me an example of how to live a life with love despite the pain. I learned that from her. But when you live with the trauma and the consequences of the things you have gone through, you had to do something in order to have a healthy and fulfilling life. I had to seek help. I went to therapy. Therapy helped me to begin my healing journey. I started journaling, which became a book later. And I felt like a load was lifted off my shoulder. Talking about rape was the hardest thing for me to talk about. I never thought I would have the courage, but with the help of therapy, I was able to find the strength and the courage to talk about it so that I can also help others to be able to begin talking about what they have gone through. And I believe that for me, it's important to make sure that we talk about it, how trauma affects the survivors. So for me, I have, there's a quote from one of my favorite author, Maya Angelou, once said, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story within." So concluding my remarks, I would love to leave you with this message. No matter what horrible circumstances you may face in your life, never lose hope. For losing hope is the beginning of your own self-defeat. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Hard to know what to say. I've heard Consuelo speak for many years, more than 10 years. We've been friends. Every time I hear her story, it's as if it's the first time that I'm hearing it. I thank you, Consuelo, for having the courage and the strength to speak, particularly for the many women and girls who, even today, still haven't found the strength to share their stories. I know you received many notes from Rwanda, even from other communities that have experienced genocide, from women and girls who've been victims of gender-based violence, thanking you for being their voice and for standing up for them. The sexual violence during the genocide, as you'll hear later today, it was not a random act during the genocide against the Tutsi. It was part of the genocide perpetration. As one researcher puts it, Robin Spencer, she states that sexual violence was not just a weapon, it was a genocide in and of itself. A step in the process of destruction of the Tutsi group, destruction of the spirit, of the will to live, and of life of itself. And I thank God that despite what happened to Consuelo, she never lost her will to live. And she's here again to speak for many voiceless women and girls. So thank you so much, Consuelo. I would now like to invite our next panelist, Sophia Murashkovsky. I do okay?
Oh, yeah.
I tried. I'm used to my name being butchered, so hopefully you understand.
Just a name.
But Sophia has been very involved with the planning of this program. You have her bio, like the bios of all the panelists. As I said, so I'm not going to be reading her entire bio, but she's a respected international law and human rights attorney. She's one of the co-chairs with Irvin and Catherine of the United Nations Committee here at the New York City Bar Association. And she's going to be speaking to us about reparative justice, about the role of sexual violence, gender-based violence during genocide, and other atrocity crimes. So we invite you to give your remarks, please.
I don't know where to begin after what I've heard. And I'm trying not to shed a tear because, quite frankly, I'm humbled. I have before me actual survivors of the Rwandan genocide. And I can tell you from my own experience, I was at the time a student at New York University, and I was still being carded. I was buying cigarettes and liquor as I was studying, and then I heard of the genocide. But to hear of a genocide is like the gradations. So you have suicide, patricide, homicide, genocide, that big bomb of a word. And it was out there in Rwanda. It wasn't in New York City. It wasn't on the Lower East Side. It wasn't where I was rehearsing plays that had to do with humanitarian issues. but it was somewhere out there. And the only justification I have today, ladies and gentlemen, of speaking to you is the fact that my family also has experienced persecution. They have also fled a country because of religious and ethnic cleansing. And so I stand here today, hopefully with the right to address these vital issues and genocide. So thank you for lending me your ear beforehand. Our wounded world is not a stranger to political unrest, to massacres and to bloody uprisings. Rwanda, a country just south of the equator, upon occasion entitled the African Switzerland, because of its majestically breathtaking lakes, valleys, and snow-capped mountains, has experienced its share of warfare without mercy, sparing no gentle soul and no mournful penitent. The Rwandan genocide remains one of the most horrific events in recent memory, marking a streak in Rwanda's history. This country, like so many other countries, has a complex history marred by a mire of racial tensions between the majority Hutu and minority Tutsi populations. The Rwandan genocide stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the catastrophic consequences of ethnic intolerance as a political extremism. It serves as a testament to the shortcomings of the international community to prevent war crimes against humanity and to safeguard all vulnerable populations. We are gathered here this evening to solemnly remember the horrors of Rwandan genocide, which is not only a duty in commemoration of the victims, but also a solemn pact of ensuring that such atrocities shall never be repeated. I would like to address women and children. These are the usual victims of war, whereas they cannot be seen fallen on battlefields with their scattered carcasses speckled across green pastures. And while diplomats often behind closed marbled walls discuss diplomacy, guns are silent, but the battle rages on. I wish to address the unspeakable, the unconscionable violence, which makes us squirm in our seats and shed bitter tears of agony. Sexual violence is a lofty yet ignoble tool of war, and so often used that while shocking, it has become lamentably all too common. Sexual violence in conflict needs to be treated as the war crime that it is. It can no longer be treated as an unfortunate collateral damage of war. So stated astutely the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ms. Zainab Hawa Bangura. The victims of modern action against sexual violence in conflict zones, the vast majority of casualties in today's wars are among civilians, mostly women and children. Women in particular face devastating forms of sexual violence, which are sometimes deployed systemically to achieve military or political objectives. Rape committed during war is often intended to bullwhip the population into submission, tear up families, desecrate communities, and alter the ethnic landscape of the generation that follows. Sexual violence against women has been unleashed to deliberately infect women with HIV, as we've heard here today, or render women from the targeted community incapable of having children. In Rwanda, between 100,000 to 250,000 women were raped during the 3 months of genocide in 1994. UN agencies estimate that more than 60,000 women were raped during the civil war in Sierra Leone in 1991 to 2002, more than 40,000 in Liberia, up to 60,000 in the former Yugoslavia, and at least 200,000 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo since 1998. Even after conflict had dissipated in these regions, the crippling ripples of sexual violence continue, including unwanted pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, stigmatization, and ostracizing. Widespread sexual violence itself may continue or even elevate in the aftermath of conflict as a consequence of insecurity and impunity, effectively assessing the needs of survivors, including medical care, HIV treatment, psychological support, again as mentioned, economic assistance, and legal redress requires resources which many post-conflict countries are simply devoid of. Recognizing sexual violence as an international crime is something that we all have to realize. For centuries, sexual violence in conflict war zones was tacitly accepted as unavoidable. A 1998 UN report on sexual violence and armed conflict notes that historically armies considered rape one of the legitimate spoils of war. During World War II, all sides of the conflict were accused of mass rapes, yet neither of the two courts valiantly erected by the victorious Allied countries to prosecute suspected war crimes for example, in Tokyo and in Nuremberg, recognized the crime of sexual violence. It was not until 1992, in the face of widespread rapes of women in the former Yugoslavia, that the issue came to the attention of the UN Security Council. In fact, it was not until the 18th of December of 1992 that the Council declared that the massive organized and systemic detention and rape of women, in particular Muslim women in Bosnia and Herzegovina, an international crime that must be addressed. Subsequently, the Statute of International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia included rape as a crime against humanity, alongside other crimes such as torture and extermination, which committed in armed conflict and directed against the civilian population. In 2001, the ICTY became the first international court to find an accused person guilty of rape as a crime against humanity. Furthermore, the court expanded the definition of slavery as a crime against humanity to include sexual slavery. Previously, forced labor was the sole kind of slavery to be labeled as a crime against humanity. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda also declared rape to be a war crime and a crime against humanity. And then in 1998, the ICTR became the first international court to find an accused person guilty of rape as a crime of genocide, used to perpetuate genocide. The judgment against the former mayor, Jean-Paul Akayesu, held that rape and sexual assault constituted acts of genocide insofar as they were committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, the Tutsi ethnic group. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, in force since July 2002, includes rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity as a crime against humanity when it is committed in a widespread or systemic way. Arrest warrants issued by the ICC include several counts of rape as both a war crime and a crime against humanity. And although progressive international and national laws are monumental steps towards penalizing and curtailing sexual violence, they cannot be rendered effective without a fundamental alteration in people's attitudes toward the sexual abuse of women. Right now, the woman who gets raped is the one who is stigmatized and excluded for it, said Dr. Dennis Mukigeri, director of Panzi Hospital in Bukavu in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, during his recent interview. Beyond laws, we have to get social sanctions on the side of women. We need to get to a point where the victim receives the support of the community, and the man who rapes is the one who is stigmatized and excluded and penalized by the whole community. The shattered lives of women have been documented as a collateral damage due to the widespread rape of women during the Rwandan genocide and its aftermath. But in this collateral damage, is a wound merely inflicted upon all of society, since women are the source of life and children are our global future? It is undeniable that during the 1994 genocide, Rwandan women were subjected to sexual violence on a massive scale. In addition to the social and personal trauma resulting from the injuries suffered from sexual violence, the women faced dire economic difficulty, serious dilemmas stemming from their second-class status under Rwandan law, health problems, dealing with children from rape, and contending with poverty and inheritance rights, all mentioned before. International national legal protections against gender-based violence must be tasked with examining sexual violence as a war crime, a crime against humanity, and an act of genocide, and a crime under Rwandan law. In the 1990s, sexual violence was recognized by international tribunals as a weapon of war, as mentioned again. In recent genocides and other conflicts, such as those in the Sudan, Burma, and Iraq, rape, as well as the religious factors of these conflicts, have garnered increasing yet still meager attention over the years. There is now significant evidence in existence on the role of religion and its nexus to rape in Rwanda, most notably Christian beliefs, but also traditional Rwandan beliefs which fueled the genocide. Further, it is a fact that not only Rwandans' indigenous beliefs, but Christian beliefs and leadership encouraged rather than discouraged rape. Let me clarify that at the intersections of genocide, religion, and sexual violence, there should rest the hope for genocide prevention as well as prosecution efforts. In 1994, the Hutu power elite propaganda signaled for the immediate expulsion of all Tutsi from Rwandan soil, a civilly oppressed minority. Ideologues convinced and mobilized the Hutu citizenry that they were obliged to defend themselves from Tutsi, an alien threat from Ethiopia, who supposedly assassinated the Rwandan Hutu president and were in league with the invading Rwandan Patriotic Front from the north in Uganda. there can be a delineation and illustration of the intersections of genocide, religion, and sexual violence as a model for examining the Rwandan genocide, as well as other past and contemporary genocides. Tutsi women and girls as childbearers and sexual objects were primarily targeted for sexual violence, but it should be noted that men and boys were sexually violated as well. As dictated by the concept of Imana, Tutsi were characterized as blocked beings who endangered the welfare of the nation. Torture techniques and methods of killing, such as the ablation of sexual organs, was a bodily inscription of the imagined counter-fertility and flow of Tutsi. Torturers reportedly forced Tutsi to commit incest, emasculated men as well as boys of non-reproductive age, and cut off women's breasts. Barbaric assaults were unleashed on the reproductive capacities of their victims. Many religious traditions are patriarchal and characterize women within their own faith communities, as well as recognize in other faith communities the status of women as inferior to men. Violence is embedded in social structures, including those of religion. When religious language is used to justify patriarchal structures of oppression, which are inherently violent because they violate women's human dignity, the circle is complete. And the circle is complete here appears to refer to the mutually reinforcing synergy between earthly and theological justifications for the subjugation of women, which makes the violence of patriarchy impossible to dismantle because it presents such patriarchy as the acceptable state of our lives and spiritual realities. A distal conceptualization of the influence of religion on genocide proffers a palatable translation of the metaphorical violence of violating women's human dignity into physical violence during genocides by arguing that patriarchal violence manifests itself under the immediate dire conditions of warfare, which sets in motion pre-conflict societal tensions and inequalities. Imagining the enemy as not merely a physical threat, but as a cosmological or theological one creates a space for extreme violence for the sake of defending wartime goals. Hence, victims are deemed not human, as sexual violence further dehumanizes the victim. However, even if victims retain their humanity, their sexlessness forfeits their right to live, to be safe from harm. Patriarchal structures in religion view women as subordinate to men, as transactional property, and as morally and spiritually vulnerable, leaving females who are members of the enemy group particularly vulnerable to abuse. Genocide in Rwanda cannot be comprehended fully without examining the gender issues that interacted with ethnic ones in complex manners involving the demarcation of social boundaries and local notions of racial purity. The annihilation of Tutsi women was not only physical but symbolic. Tutsi women, even prior to the genocide, were objects of sexual ambivalence. To Hutu men, Tutsi women were more desirable than Hutu women, for the Hamitic myth and the practice of Europeans nearly always coupling with Tutsi rather than Hutu women. Due to this intimate contact between Tutsi women and European men, Rwandans believe that Tutsi women participated in abhorrent, non-procreative, and therefore immoral sexual behavior. Leading up to the genocide, Hutu extremists seized upon this perception to demonize the counter-fertile sexual practices of Tutsi women, primarily in the form of explicit cartoons depicting Tutsi women engaging in group sex, anal penetration, and oral sex with Europeans, much to the disgust of most Rwandans. Such value judgments may reflect Rwandan acculturation to the sexual norms promulgated by the Catholic Church, but by now they have been well internalized. The violence Tutsi women suffered was an attempt by Hutu men to purge the ambivalence in sexually symbolic ways, and this may partially explain why the rapes of Tutsis women were ghastly brutal. Women were just as likely to perish from the mortal afflictions of rape as from the blow of a machete. The fact that most victims died immediately or instantly after their assaults points to a motive other than creating conditions designed to make rebuilding a Tutsi community hard. As one rape victim testified, these rapes were designed to humiliate us, a humiliation that nearly always preceded death. Genocide perpetrators also forced Tutsi to commit incest in the wide view of other family members. And one court witness testified, "I found a body, the legs were apart, and the body of her child was placed on her genitals as if she was being forced to have sexual intercourse with her own mother." In the aftermath of genocide, In the town of Namara, the body of a woman was discovered in a church with a spear lodged through her vagina that exited through her chest. The fact that she was violated in a church only heightened the dignity of the act, since until that time, Rwandans reliably observed a policy of sanctuary during conflicts. Moreover, as supported by an abundance of ICTR testimonies, ablation, impalement, as well as vaginally and anally assaulting Tutsi victims with sticks were widespread practices during the genocide. A member of the Interhawami relayed, "I saw these two people rape a girl. I saw them rape her, and after they used a spear to pierce her, and they also pierced her sexual organs. I saw them cut off her breast. After cutting the girl's breast off, the Kajali sucked it." As senseless as these barbarous acts may appear, they were committed within the logic of the bountiful flow of Imana, which was either redirected, as in the case of instance, where blood and semen flow backward upon one another in a closed circuit, or blocked, as in the case of the removal of sexual organs and impalement. The counter-fertility of blocked beings, although an indigenous Rwandan cosmological logic, was reinforced by sexual norms of non-native colonial Christianity. As a nuanced analysis of Hutu attitudes and sexually inflected genocidal behavior permit me to arrive at a pseudo-scholarly observation of a genocide that does not closely attend to Rwanda's religious practices and cosmological framework. Case in point, Elissa von Joudenforgi, in her work on the gendered aspects of genocide, argues that genocidal rapists exploit social context and symbols to maximize damage in going beyond compromising the physical and psychological ability of women and girls to carry children. It seems to puncture, to wound that invincible space inside a woman's body and disintegrate its very essence and a source of being. Could that be the message transmitted by the perpetrators' use of sharpened sticks to rape and kill Tutsi women during the Rwandan genocide? Perhaps, but impalement could also have been an operative on another level that is apparent by attending to a more culture-specific religious worldview, such as that of the cosmological view of Imana and blocked beings. Without this data, a crucial local component of the message that Van Joudenforgi speculates rapists transmitted to their victim group in public acts of rape during the Rwandan genocide escapes scrutiny. I will now turn to the tender issues of reparative justice for criminal acts against humanity. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda remains a painful chapter in human history. Over 1 million people, predominantly Tutsi, but also including Hutu and others who opposed the genocide, lost their lives during those 100 days of terror that began on April 7, 1994. The carnage was driven by the explicit intent to destroy members of a group simply because of their ethnic identity, and this holds true for any initiation of genocide. In the aftermath of such atrocities, the question of reparation arises. So here are some aspects to consider. A legal framework in Rwanda. In theory, the Rwandan legal framework explicitly provides for genocide survivors to receive compensation. Approximately 50% of judgments made by the specialized chambers for prosecuting genocide suspects have awarded financial compensation to victims. Additionally, Rwanda has undertaken many non-financial components of reparations, including an annual public commemoration and the establishment of the Fonds d'assistance au rescapés de génocide, which provides health care and tuition for survivors. Now let's talk about international responsibility. The international community also bears grave responsibility. The genocide unfolded in full view of the global community, which failed Rwanda by not taking swift action to prevent or cease the war crimes. Some conferences and recommendations have called for reparations from countries that could have intervened but did not. And this seems to be something that happens during genocide. Hence, we must never forget such atrocities. By countering hate speech, the United Nations has renewed its commitment to never forget the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Events like candlelighting ceremonies, which we will do today, honor the victims, survivors, and those who tried to stop the genocide. Focus is also on countering hate speech, which has fueled the killings and remains a growing global concern today. In summary, while financial reparations are challenging, Rwanda continues to address the legacy of the genocide through various means, emphasizing remembrance, education, and healing. The scars of such atrocities serve as a reminder that peace requires active effort and prevention. So let us collectively strive to ensure that such horrors are never repeated in our shared human conscience and in our heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sophia,
Thank you.
for your remarks, for shedding light on the far too common use of sexual violence, many forms of sexual violence and gender-based violence during genocide, war, and other mass atrocity crimes. And it's important to mention that while, as Sophia described, sexual violence, as many of us well know, is characteristic of every atrocity crime that we have witnessed, it's also important to remember that it's not inevitable. Unlike straight bullet, sexual violence, gender-based violence during conflict is preventable. It's not an inevitable part of any atrocity crime. It's very important for us to remember that. As one panelist at a panel that I recently attended said, we have to remember that gender-based violence involves a very close relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. It is always a choice, and therefore, there is no excuse by anybody or any government for failing to prevent it or to punish it. And thank you for mentioning the ICTR case. As you heard, for the first time, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which functioned many years in Tanzania, for the first time, rape was defined under international law and recognized as a means of perpetrating genocide. So this case has set a very important precedent for the future prosecutions of gender-based crimes, and we hope that it will not just exist on paper, but in practice, that the international community can start doing more to protect and to bring justice to victims of gender-based violence. I now would like to invite our final panelist, Dr. Michelle Sanders. You have her bio in your program, but she's a licensed psychologist here in New York City. She has worked with many communities that have been victims of mass atrocity crimes, including the Yazidi community, as she perhaps will discuss. She has worked with people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which, as you can imagine, is the case with many survivors of mass atrocity crimes. She's on a board of FAFI with Catherine, and I'm also honored to sit on the board with her, along with Dr. Yael Danieli, who's here. There's a center, International Center for the Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, that Dr. Danieli founded. She's here. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Danieli Center, which Michelle and I are, again, honored to be a part of, has done and continues to do incredible work in the area of trauma healing and prevention of intergenerational transmission of trauma. So I'm going to invite Michelle to share her remarks on this topic.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I am indeed both honored and humbled to be here today, and my thanks and appreciation to the heartfelt and moving speakers who come before me. I hope I can play a small part in the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsis on this 30th anniversary. So I'm going to talk about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm going to talk about how trauma manifests in adults and children, and I'm going to give some suggestions related to how individuals can help to heal themselves and how parents can help children to deal with traumatic responses. I have a handout at the end of the program. If anyone's interested, you can see me later. So the data that I'm going to report is based on peer-reviewed academic journals from the American Psychological Association, from scholarly experts including Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Selma Freyberg, Dr. Francine Shapiro, and my esteemed mentor who is with us today, Dr. Yael Danieli, who is the world's foremost expert on trauma, the multi-generational transmission of trauma, and victimology. I hope I do well today as your mentee. So when we think about the multi-generational transmission of trauma, it's important and helpful to think about the definition of trauma. We psychologists use the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, to diagnose trauma, and PTSD. It's considered part of trauma and stress-related disorders. And the first criterion is related to a person experiencing actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. This exposure can be direct, having experienced it themselves, or indirectly seeing someone else go through these experiences. Not everyone who witnesses or learns about a traumatic event or who goes through a traumatic event will develop a traumatic response. Factors that can ameliorate or worsen the response include genetic predispositions, social and emotional support systems, coping skills, problem solving. It's important to remember that it's not the traumatic event, but one's perception of that traumatic event. Two people can go by a very horrific car accident. One person may have a traumatic response and another may not. So how does trauma make somebody feel? Dr. Danieli describes it as a state of being stuck from present life through life in the stuck in the past life and having difficulty staying in the present and the future. So if you can try to imagine a fearful or anxiety-provoking time in your life, maybe it was a fear of flying. Try to connect with how you felt physically. Did you have physical symptoms? What were you thinking about? What was going through your head? How did you get through the day? Well, people who have a traumatic response and live in this chronic state of being stuck have intrusive, repetitive thoughts that indeed stay in their heads. You can't wish them away. They are intrusive, they are bothersome, they are annoying. People have flashbacks, feel as if they're reliving the traumatic event, even if it happened many years ago. Individuals tend to avoid reminders, people, places, things, food, smells of that traumatic event. People report feeling down, sad, hopeless, have negative beliefs about themselves and about the world, a distorted sense of self-blame. What did I do to cause this? They can feel socially isolated and alienated, have problems sleeping, getting through the daily activities of life, concentrating, and recurrent nightmares. And there's a state of physiological arousal, feeling triggered, stressed. It's like living in a chronic state of fear. As you can see, these effects can affect virtually every aspect of a person's psyche and can interfere with the ability to navigate everyday activities. So this is primarily in adults. So what does this look like in children? Recurrent nightmares that are sometimes related to the traumatic event, not the nightmares that every child has from time to time, but a pattern of nightmares. Children will regress to an earlier developmental stage. Those who are fully toilet trained day and night may have accidents. They may regress in their language. A child who was speaking may stop speaking. I had a case in the South Bronx of a child who witnessed the death of her sister. This was a 4-year-old girl who previously was toilet trained day and night, who had receptive and expressive language, the ability to understand and to use language that was developmentally appropriate, and she stopped talking. She was experiencing trauma. Kids can also be socially withdrawn. They may not want to play. They may not want to hang out with their friends. They can be sad. They can feel guilt. They can be very confused. They can become very clingy, unusually clingy with their primary caregivers. Children are experiencing trauma It's easier for them to feel angry than to feel sad, so they may act out in aggressive ways. And I will talk a little bit more about this later. How does the brain react to trauma? A burgeoning field in psychology, and we know a lot more than we did, so much more to learn. So of course the brain has 4 lobes. I'll talk about 2. The frontal lobe, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, organization, judgment, and logical thinking. And the temporal lobe, which is part of which the limbic system is in, which regulates our emotions, learning, and memory. When people are traumatized, the brain is flooded with neurotransmitters like cortisol and adrenaline, and they prepare the body for fight, flight, or flee. And this is usually related to the traumatic memory. New research suggests that not only is the limbic system triggering, but it dampens the effectiveness of the prefrontal cortex, that logical sequential part of our brains. So without the ability to identify why individuals are feeling overwhelmed or to integrate new experiences, it's very confusing. They can't plan. Their plan is interrupted because the limbic system, the emotional part of our brains, is so lit up that it's taking over the rational parts of our brains. The multi-generational transmission of trauma. Noted theorist Dr. Selma Freiberg examined the intergenerational transmission of trauma in mothers who were abused in their own childhoods. She coined the phrase ghosts in the nursery. And she suggested that a mother's unresolved childhood trauma can prevent her from being a responsive, emotionally and physical caregiver for her child. And that's because her own pain has not been processed. A barrier is created between the mother and the child, which interferes with the mother's ability to express compassion, be responsive, and show empathy. In essence, a mother is wrapped up in her own traumatic feelings and is unable to be responsive to her child as a separate, autonomous individual. Parents can become overly protective with direct and indirect messages. Don't trust others. Don't trust the world. It's not a safe place. It's really important to note that these processes are largely unconscious. They are typically not malevolent. Most mothers are not even aware that this is happening. The transmission of trauma are the stories that individuals tell themselves and the stories that are passed to their children. Again, indirectly, directly, verbally, non-verbally. Dr. Yael Danieli's seminal research about Holocaust survivors and their families includes specific behavioral patterns among children, including an overly protective view of their parents, a high need for control, and immature dependencies. She described these reactions as reparative adaptational impacts, as children try to repair the world for their parents, their grandchildren, and themselves. A parent's parenting style can decrease or increase a child's experience of trauma. Research related to genocide suggests that the intergenerational transmission of trauma shows a pattern of either maintaining silence or in expressing hope that such an event would never occur again. There are indirect effects of the genocide as well. The sequelae of heightened poverty, greater family burden, lack of trust in institutions, and compromised parenting. Survivors' initial reactions may also affect future generations. Living under difficult, fear-based, oppressive circumstances can manifest with messages of vulnerability. Don't ask for help, it's dangerous. There can be a fear of disclosing painful personal experiences to mental health professionals and to other people. How individuals and adults and children can be helped. As flight attendants have told us over many years, it's important to put your own oxygen mask on before you put your child's on. The same is true of traumatic interventions. When parents can approach their children from a calm, thoughtful, and emotionally available perspective, children will feel calmer. There are several reliable and valid instruments to treat trauma, and the common thread is building a narrative, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Traumatic memories are fragmented in the brain. They are not integrated into long-term memory. They are split off. So the work of trauma, whatever tool is utilized, is from fragmentation to integration, from part to whole. Once these traumatic memories are integrated, they can be processed and dealt with. It's important to remember that it's physiologically impossible to be calm and anxious at the same time. So what I'm going to describe are some strategies which can help people to feel calmer. Again, I have handouts for this. Okay, deep breathing. A lot of people tell me they do deep breathing, but this particular type of deep breathing comes from the work from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He has a wonderful book, The Body Keeps the Score, which you can get at the bookstore. It's not an academic journal. So I can demonstrate. How does he do this? Inhale through your nose, hold it 1, 2, 3 seconds, make a whistle with your mouth. Exhale and make a long exhale. And then if you can imagine, take your fingers in your hands, any stress, anything that's bothering you is leaving your body through the tips of your fingers. This takes practice like everything, but it's particularly helpful for when people are feeling overwhelmed or very, very triggered. Another strategy that you can do is a person can do is to practice mindfulness. That's a very big buzzword. Well, what does that mean? It means using your senses to stay in tune with your environment. What do you see, hear, feel, touch, smell? Do you feel your feet on the ground in the chair? Are you listening to me speaking? Can you smell those yummy chocolates over there? A mantra that we can add to help us be more present and not focused on the past and the future and practice mindfulness is, that was then, this is now. People find this incredibly grounding. It reminds us to be connected to where we are at this particular time. The next strategy, and again, these strategies that I'm suggesting, you can do no harm with them. I often, when I'm working with Yazidi survivors and local mental health clinicians in Iraq, I routinely suggest that clinicians and individuals themselves try these strategies. Again, it's about maintaining a sense of calm in our nervous system when the nervous system really wants to be overwhelmed and triggered. The work of Dr. Francine Shapiro is related to eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is our first-line treatment for soldiers returning from combat. So the bilateral stimulation, BLS, that I'm going to talk about is an offshoot of the work of Dr. Shapiro's, which has been reliable and valid and replicated for over 30 years. So I can do a quick demonstration. Bilateral stimulation, cross your hands over your chest like this, and you can tap. I made a mistake. Start with some nice deep breathing first, and then cross your arms across your chest like this, and tap, tap. Excellent, Ambassador. Tap, tap, tap. And tap as quickly as you want or as slowly as you want. There's no particular rhythm. When you're doing the tapping, I would suggest saying a positive self-statement. What does that mean? How do you want to feel? I am calm, I am okay, I am safe. We know that this bilateral stimulation works based on the work out of EMDR, which has something to do with REM, rapid eye movement when we're sleeping. We don't know specifically how it works, but as I said, it's been studied and replicated, and mental health clinicians will know this, for many, many years. So I love BLS, bilateral stimulation. It's a really easy take-home strategy, and it's, again, come up with whatever positive self-statement you feel is appropriate for you at the time. How else can we ameliorate the multi-generational legacies of trauma in individuals? Establish connections with family, friends, community, faith-based institutions. Why does this help? Because individuals feel a part of something bigger than themselves. They are identified with something more than just the traumatic event or the genocide. Self-care. This sounds really simple, but it's so important. People who have experienced trauma or not I'd suggest taking care of ourselves. Why? Because when we take care of ourselves, we have the capacity for more empathy. We have a better self-esteem and view of ourselves. It gives us permission to feel good. We don't need to be stuck in past traumatic experiences that can sometimes identify us, right? So how do you do this? avoid isolation, make time for the balance of family, friendships, and me time. And I know that's hard, particularly for moms. Have realistic expectations of what you can and can't do. For example, I cannot change the past, but I can be an active participant in my present and future life. At one time, I did not have control. Now I have control. These statements you can say in the mirror, you can say to yourself, give people a sense of agency, a sense of efficacy that they can control when at times in their lives events were horrifically uncontrollable. Okay, how can we help our kids? Kids of all ages do better when they have structure and boundaries and expectations. They may want to run around and do whatever they want, but psychologically that can be harmful to them. They know unconsciously that they cannot handle the world like the adults and their caregivers can. When they have too much autonomy, they can become very fearful. So how do you help your kid? Ask your kid some open-ended questions. How was your day? What was the best part of your day? And follow the child's lead. In other words, if your child is talking about a particular subject that perhaps you didn't ask a question about, stay with that subject. That makes a child feel heard, a child feel validated. Let the child set the agenda. If your child is struggling with negative emotions, you may want to reflect back to them and say, seem like you're angry. Let's talk about it. Or you can say, I felt angry too at some times. It's okay. If children don't have words to describe their feelings, you can ask them to draw or color something depicting their feelings. And I have some books that I've brought that are wonderful, colorful monsters, good monsters that can help little children connect with their feelings in a lovely way. I have them after the program if you like. As I said earlier, for children, sometimes it's easier to be angry than to be sad. They can act out in what appear to be aggressive ways, but sometimes that acting out is not aggression, it's that they're going through something hard and they're feeling overwhelmed. Parents know their kids best. If anyone, an individual or an adult, are feeling recurrent feelings of sadness, of helplessness and hopelessness, of perhaps thinking, maybe I'm better off not here, what would the world look like if I weren't here? That's a time to seek professional help. Sometimes, rarely, I should say not sometimes, rarely with children who get in frequent accidents with their bike or roller skates or whatever they're doing, that can be suicidal ideation. So really, parents know their kids best. If you think your kid is in trouble and you're doing everything you can, that's a time to seek professional help. I'd like to close with a quote that I find helpful and is close to my heart by Elie Wiesel. What hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressors, but the silence of the bystander. Today, we are not silent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Dr. Sanders, for your remarks and for the exercises that I know all of us needed this evening. Trauma healing, intergenerational transmission of trauma, it's something that a lot of survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi are concerned with, as you can imagine. Many of us have become parents since the genocide, and we want to do as much as we can to make sure that although we will and are educating our children about our history, about the loss of our loved ones, about the fact that they no longer have grandparents or aunts or cousins, it is our utmost hope that we can minimize the type of pain and trauma that the next generation will carry. So we very much appreciate your expertise, and I know you have offered your services to survivors, and I very much Appreciate that. Because of time, we are going to skip the Q&A part of our discussion this evening. We appreciate you having taken the time to be with us, and we don't want to abuse that time. We recognize this is a weekday evening, and many people have work tomorrow. So we're going to skip the Q&A and instead turn to the next part of our program, where we're going to hear from two honorary speakers that we have the honor and pleasure of having with us this evening. And we're going to, after we hear from the speakers, we are going to have a candlelighting ceremony by survivors and others who may wish to join us. I want to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Alice Wairimunderotu, who is the United Nations Under-Secretary General and the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. As I mentioned, she's a recognized voice in the field of peace building and violence prevention, having led a mediator and senior advisor in reconciliation process. You have her bio. I encourage you to read about her incredible background. But on a personal note, I want to thank you, Special Advisor, for being with us, not just tonight, but over the past several days as the 30th commemoration of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi began on April 7th specifically. I have seen the Special Advisor in DC. I've seen her on TV in Rwanda. I'm seeing you here. I saw you last week at the General Assembly observance. And your commitment to this work and your solidarity with survivors does not go unnoticed. We appreciate your time, and I personally have seen over the past several days that this is beyond a job for you, that it's a commitment. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we would like to invite you to give your remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for this event today and for this invitation, and to the survivors, who both of you are, just to say that, again, we feel so committed that there are quite a number of us out there who feel so committed to helping you to get your story out, to helping you to helping more and more people to hear what happened to you. So I join you today on this commemoration to mark the 30th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And we continue to honor the victims and survivors of this crime, this horrible crime, so that their lives may never be forgotten. We honor their memory, and we honor the solemn commitment to do everything possible to prevent the commission of genocide, which we know has been called the crime of crimes for a good reason. So I begin by thanking you again, Jacqueline. I begin by thanking the New York City Bar Association, the United Nations Committee, the Genocide Survivors Foundation, for hosting this moment for us to collectively pay our tribute and reflect on these unimaginable crimes that were committed 30 years ago against the Tutsi in Rwanda. So as Jacqueline, you say, rightfully, I was in Kigali in Rwanda, and this being the 30th commemoration, I've been in quite a number of places, and I will continue to travel to as many places as possible and to speak about this crime. It's been the case that the word genocide, we hear it more often now than we used to before. Sometimes it's people calling attention to what's happening to them. They feel that if they don't use the word genocide, people will not pay attention. At other times, people instrumentalize this word. They weaponize this word. And we do know that, in essence, that genocide is a crime of identity, and that the perpetrators are not simply committing ordinary crimes against individuals, that they act with the precise intent to destroy in whole or in part a specific national, ethnic, or racial or religious group. And this, of course, comes from the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of this crime of genocide. They act with the intent to erase an entire group of people, denying their humanity, rejecting their memory and their history, and undermining every fundamental aspect that makes them part of that group, their identity. And this is achieved following a process which has many stages, including discrimination and dehumanization to annihilation and then denial. Each step contributes to the foundations for the next, and each step requires our alert and timely action to prevent. So I was asked today to come and speak to what exactly is it we do, what are we doing? And I must start by saying that at the United Nations, we do know that the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994 and the Srebrenica genocide in 1995 prompted the creation of the office that I now hold by the late Secretary General Kofi Annan, and it has a global mandate. He created this office of the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and he wanted somebody to detect and provide early warning signs of this crime, so that then he himself and the Security Council, to whom I report to, would take timely action to prevent it. So we do know that when he made this, when he was making this appointment, so the late Secretary General Kofi Annan, he apologized. He said, "I'm sorry. I am sorry to Rwanda. I am sorry to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm sorry to the victims. I'm sorry to the survivors. And I hope that the legacy I leave behind is of a world in which no other genocide happens. And if it happens, that then the United Nations can play a more active role in preventing it." Sadly, we do know that that is not the reality. And I know, of course, the Yazidi, they've been mentioned here a number of times. I've spent a lot of time in Iraq with the Yazidi survivors. Up to today, we have close to 3,000. We have about more than 2,700 women, especially, who are held as sex slaves. They were captured from the Yazidi community. But we've also had very dynamic movement in terms of arrests. Like, for example, we have this case of this man whose name is Taha, who was arrested and tried in Frankfurt, in a court in Frankfurt, and for the crime of genocide. And it's changed the thinking that we had before, that governments have to be complicit in a genocide for a genocide to happen, which of course was informed by what happened in the Holocaust, where it was informed by what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, informed by what happened in Rwanda. But we saw for the Yazidi that you didn't need a government complicity, that a group like ISIS, like Daesh, could do what they did. So my mandate is to monitor, to raise alarm, and alert the Secretary General, as I've said, over situations across the world where there's a risk of genocide or related crimes, by which I mean war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm also mandated to raise awareness on the causes and dynamics of these crimes, and to strengthen the capacity of member states, regional organizations, and civil society to prevent them. So my office is also the global focal point on hate speech, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, but I must emphasize that we have a UN working definition of hate speech, and that definition of hate speech respects the fact of international human rights law, respects the fact of the freedom of expression, and defines hate speech from the perspective of what meets the threshold of incitement to violence. So for us, of course, it's very specific violence, because we do know that hate speech is both an indicator as well as a trigger for this crime of genocide. So we have what we call the Rabat plan of action that helps us to contextualize what exactly is hate speech, and it has some steps that we look at in terms of context, in terms of where it's spoken, who it's spoken to. So there is a whole way that we ascertain whether what we are looking at is hate speech that could lead to incitement, that could then lead to this crime of genocide. So I must emphasize that my mandate is on prevention, not on adjudication. I do not have the mandate to make a determination if a particular situation amounts to genocide or other related crimes. I do not have the mandate to say whether a genocide is occurring or not, because this is the mandate of judicial institutions with the relevant jurisdiction. So what I do is point out the risk factors for genocide that exists in any situation, and for that I'll also speak a bit later about. So I have to emphasize that not many people realize the power of prevention and how much we have to do in terms of investing in prevention. Not many people realize how little choice we have when a genocide actually begins to happen, when it's already occurring, when it's not our hands on the trigger, when it's not our hands on the machete, how few choices we have, and that we have to make sure that it doesn't happen, because when it begins to happen, our choices become slimmer and slimmer, and at some point, the only choice we have is accountability, holding those who perpetrate this genocide accountable. So last year, we marked the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And on that particular day, we do know that in 1948, on December 9th, the world committed to its very first convention, whose Article 1 says that the contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and to punish. So to date, 153 countries out of 193 UN member states have ratified the Genocide Convention. So several initiatives are underway to have more countries ratify. And I say this with pride that I was so proud just about a month ago. I was in Zambia, which is the latest country to ratify the convention. And in Zambia, we set up a committee that I'll speak about in terms that will help to domesticate this convention. So my office implements its mandate with limited capacity, but continuous creativity and determination, as many will attest. I often say that this office may not have much, but it does have voice, and that when we speak, people listen. Whatever we issue, people read. So for the first Kwibuka since I joined office, now this is my third year, and for the first Kwibuka, for me, the key thing that was troubling me was that people were not calling this genocide by its rightful name. They were calling it the Rwandan genocide, they were calling it the genocide in Rwanda. And of course, this is instrumentalized by deniers who then put themselves in that mix and say, we too, this genocide, we were part of it, we were also killed. And we do know that this genocide has a name, and this name was given by a General Assembly resolution. But also the General Assembly resolution got the name from the International Criminal Tribunal for the the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that named what had happened in Rwanda as genocide. And so that first year when I came, we worked with the then permanent representative. I asked her, can you explain to me why even within the UN we are not calling this genocide by its rightful name? Who was targeted in this genocide? Genocides target people based on identity. Was it not the Tutsi? If a General Assembly resolution says that this is a genocide against the Tutsi, that also recognizes that in this genocide that there were Hutu and other people who opposed it who were killed. Why are we not calling it by its name? So then that became my mission for that year, and I embarked on a huge mission, writing letters, sensitizing my colleagues, ensuring speeches, including the Secretary General, carried the words genocide against the Tutsi. Then the following year, I was inspired in the following year because I went to the first countries I visited when I joined this office was Bosnia-Herzegovina because of the Srebrenica genocide, and then of course Rwanda because of the genocide against the Tutsi. And in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I was confronted by deniers who were so brazen. They were writing newspaper articles, they were making speeches, they even held a commission of inquiry to prove that the genocide did not happen against the Bosniak Muslims. And so I saw denial for what it was and did huge amounts of research, and then realized that actually that the deniers of the genocide against the Tutsi, the deniers of the Srebrenica genocide, both genocides that have been determined as so by international criminal tribunals, one for Rwanda and the other one for the former Yugoslavia, that they were actually not very imaginative, that they were borrowing a template from Holocaust deniers. And that if you read, like, for example, the court case, Deborah Lipstad's court case with David Iving, the arguments that David Iving was making are the same arguments that these genocide deniers make in other contexts. They speak about numbers, they talk about instructions, written instructions, you know, that kind of thing. So we understand, so we monitor risks of atrocity crimes. So we have specific risks for genocide, we have risk for war crimes, we have risk for crimes against humanity. And we understand that these risks can change, sometimes lessen, or sometimes emerge as new ones. And always we adapt our strategies to address this very evolving context. So my office sets agendas in many ways, including through policy documents. So we have that framework of analysis that I've described as the risk factors. We also have a plan of action for religious leaders called the phase plan of action. Because we are so few and the investment on prevention is not such a great priority as would be the case. Usually investments are on what happens after a war begins. So what we do is focus on constituencies, working with constituencies around the world, influential constituencies. So we do have this plan of action for religious leaders and actors. And then that came before I joined the office. Since I have joined the office, since I took up leadership in this office, we've launched many more. So for example, after I made the connection that I've just talked about, then we did a policy document that's called Combating Holocaust and Genocide Denial, Protecting Survivors, Preserving Memory, and Promoting Prevention. And then I was invited to Pittsburgh, where there was the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue. And I went there and I found this community, or the Pittsburgh community, working on eradicating hate. They had a huge conference, and just thinking in terms of what we could do with this community that was doing so much work. But then this is America, so we are talking about they are eradicating hate, and I was saying we need to be a bit more specific about the speech. And I was saying the person who killed the people in Pittsburgh, he wrote on social media, he declared his intent. He said he hates migrants, he hates Jewish people, he hates, you know, all the categories of people he hates, and that he's going to kill them, which he did. And the same thing happened in Buffalo. I also went to Buffalo where they had a shooting in the supermarket. And again, I was saying, Americans, you must make the connection between the speech and the crime. This person in Buffalo, he wrote on social media, he said, I hate black people, I'm going to kill them, and I'm going to start a race war. He also said he hates Jewish people. And actually, when he was caught, he was heading to a synagogue. So, but we couldn't quite put our finger on what is it we must do together. I really wanted to raise the voice of the people in Pittsburgh and what they were doing, bringing together all these communities. And on my way out at the airport in Pittsburgh, I saw all these photographs of athletes. And so I called, later I called the team in Pittsburgh, and I said to them, you people must like sports a lot. There are lots of sportsmen in your airport. So maybe we could do something around sports and hate. We could put something together. And then it turned out, then they were telling me, yeah, but this is the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is what you've done. And I was like, where I come from, we don't know the Steelers, but you must love these the athletes very much. And during the session when I was there was a woman. She spoke about how her two brothers were shot inside the synagogue. And when she finished speaking, she went and stood outside. She was just standing alone. And I could see her from where I was sitting. And I walked out and I told her, I just want to give you a hug. And I gave her a hug. We didn't introduce ourselves to each other. We did not talk. But then I went back to my seat, and later she came back to her seat. So just coincidentally, it turns out that she had been managing communication for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we connected. And what we produced together, so she brought on board the Pittsburgh Steelers, she brought the Penguins, and then she brought on board, so then we kept growing. So then the Red Sox came on board, the Buffalo Bills came on board, and then we got NASCARs, we got, we have all the leagues, NBA, NFL, they all came. And on December 9th, which is a commemoration of the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of last year but one, not this year. So they all showed up at the UN, and the Secretary General launched the game plan, which is our plan of action for countering hate speech through sports. And then we got invited by Liverpool Football Club, and we started having this whole conversation. And I'm saying all this because in all these spaces, I ensure, since I joined this office, I have never made a speech in which I did not mention the genocide against the Tutsi, in which I did not mention the Srebrenica genocide, in which I did not mention the Holocaust, and in which I do not, and I'm talking about these three, especially in Cambodia, because the international criminal tribunals determined that what happened there either had genocidal intent or was genocide. So we have a whole community out there of sports people who are having this conversation, who understand hate from the context of what happened to the Tutsi and what happened to these other communities. And then we have another one, we have another plan of action that we put together with UNESCO for addressing hate speech through education, which is a guide for policymakers, which we put together again with ministers of education from everywhere in the world, all of them. We sat with them and did an outcome document that has 5 key points. And again, those 5 key points, it's on hate and hate speech. And all of that, of course, is driven by the fact that there are very, very clear examples of the hate speech that led to the genocide against the Tutsi. And then we went to Italy and we did a plan of action called the Napoli Plan of Action. This is for women, because I'm a woman and I'm the first woman to occupy this position. And we have to find space for women who are in communities who need to frame whatever happened to them through hate speech and prevention of genocide. We have a plan of action. And then we've had now for 3 years now, a conversation with tech and social media companies. And we began having this conversation long before anybody was talking to them. People were just seeing how powerful they are and not talking to them. And we've been having these Chatham House Rule meetings with them and working with them because they were too big. We were condemning them, but nothing was happening. We were issuing statements, nothing was happening. So then we went for the other approach, sitting with them in a room and now thinking through what is it we can do in terms of countering hate speech. So we've been sitting with their leadership. Through the years, we have these recommendations and we influenced from the very beginning their algorithms. So like, if, for example, you're looking for denial of the genocide against the Tutsi, then we get you to information that comes to you is about how the genocide against the Tutsi happened. So we've done quite a bit, and we've also helped them put together codes of conduct for their content moderators. We even contributed to their hiring people who would be working on these kind of things, recommended people who they could hire, human rights lawyers, And finally, last year, we looked at what we'd been putting together, all the recommendations, and decided they were not so Chatham House rules anymore, not so secret anymore, and we produced this guide for policymakers and practitioners. And so that's why when I talk about imagination and creativity, that we have to keep approaching this with imagination and creativity. So we also conduct lots of fact-finding missions. And so, like, for example, I was invited by the Brazilian government and to assess the situation of the Yanomami and Guarani Kaiowá indigenous people. And again, everywhere I go, I put out the example of the Tutsi. This is what happened to the Tutsi. Can you see patterns? Can you see the same patterns that happened to them happening to you? So there is lots of engagement with the Security Council, General Assembly, Human Rights Council, ECOSOC, all these groups. So I would say that we keep emphasizing that states have the primary obligations to prevent and protect their populations from this crime of genocide. We've worked greatly on supporting states to do this. And we've now focusing on data, timely and reliable data for decision making at all levels of the UN system. So if I may go back to Zambia, because it provides a practical example of what you can do with a country that has ratified the Genocide Convention. So Zambia is in the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes region is a space right now where hate speech against the Tutsi, especially the Congolese Tutsi, has been so high, and that this hate speech has actually contributed directly to killings and violence against the Congolese Tutsi. And so with the Zambia ratifying this convention provides us this opportunity to actually revive efforts that were put in place by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, because they established a very strong protocol, the ICGLR protocol. We often say that we don't even have anything anywhere in the world that is as strong in terms of prevention of genocide and as clear as this particular protocol of the Great Lakes region, because it asks that member states establish these institutions with specific objectives of preventing genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So there's lots that's happening there, and so we keep raising our voice so that we keep speaking to these specific issues. So 75 years after the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, 76 years this year. And of course, despite significant progress in understanding the risk factors, indicators, and early warning signs, we are really far from a position where we can say that this horrific crime is relegated to the history books. And I often emphasize that we must pay specific attention to communities to whom genocide has already happened. Why? Because the stereotypes, the stigmatization, the dehumanization, all this language that enabled the genocides to happen in the first place continues to exist today. And that explains why, for example, for the Jewish people, there were pogroms that went back 2,000 years. That explains why, for the Tutsi, that this was a genocide that people came to know about because of its magnitude and because of what was going on at that particular time, like in the world, like news could get out. But this had happened before in 1959, it had happened before in the 60s, several times in the 70s, it had happened before. And I think there was reference to this church in Nyamata, because for me, in Rwanda, the place that speaks most to me is that church. There's a church called Nyamata, and if you go to Nyamata, then you'll find that it was a place that the Tutsi had run to for protection. Why did they go to that church? Because they had previously done so. Each time when they were targeted, they ran to that church. So when these genocide deniers are speaking about how this could not have happened and all that kind of thing, they went there because they thought they would be safe, and then they were killed in that church. If you haven't been to Rwanda, if you go to Rwanda, please go to that church. You will see on the walls where they smashed the heads of babies. You will see a woman who has great significance for me. I think about her all the time. She keeps me grounded. She reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing. That woman has a pole was sharpened, a long pole, and it was driven through her body. And she's lying there with that pole. And you know, when you look at her and you think about intent, think about the person who sharpened that pole for that specific action. Think about what she had to go through because her hips are broken. And it speaks a lot that we, so privileged in the kind of position that I hold right now, that I can speak and people listen, that I can speak and people quote me, that I must keep saying that we must ensure that we call this genocide by its name, the genocide against the Tutsi. We must call it out when it's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You've seen the narratives that have been going around, so shrouded in geopolitics and all kinds of issues, lots of descriptions about the M23, and those descriptions of the M23 completely ignore the fact that there are more than 130 armed groups in the same space, and how these narratives take shape, and how these narratives then have informed the existence of the Congolese Tutsi, so that when people focus on the killings there, everybody now is presumed to be M23 in an armed group, and how these narratives have completely ignored the fact that those armed groups in the DRC, fighting for all kinds of reasons, including resources and everything else, that for the M23, they are fighting for many things, but one key thing makes them distinct from all the other armed groups in the DRC. They are fighting for survival. And it has been the tradition in every election since independence in the DRC to frame the Tutsi, they say the Rwandan people, as the problem, so that then the focus is no longer on the country, but on the neighbor who is about to attack us. And when you look at Rwanda and you look at DRC, you know how absurd that is when you look at the size of the two countries. So I do think that it's absolutely, absolutely important that we keep speaking about these things, and that to emphasize that the international community failed Rwanda, the UN failed Rwanda, but has now been very instrumental in setting up the judicial commissions, the judicial mechanism, necessary to determine genocide as a crime. And of course, this includes the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. And we do know that the ICTR determined conclusively that a genocide was committed against the Tutsi in Rwanda. I was in Arusha not so long ago, maybe about 2 months ago, and our discussions were around, I addressed the judicial colloquium, I was the keynote speaker, and I was asking them, I told them, you know, we really, really do need to pay attention to the fact that so much of what is true, so much of what can fight these narratives that are shaped against the Tutsi in this region, that are shaped against the Bosnian Muslims in Yugoslavia, are actually in courts of law. And they are there as evidence, and the only people who are paying attention to them are as verdicts, people who are paying attention are scholars, especially legal scholars. And we must ensure that we move whatever is in the courtroom to the classroom, and that needs to become the most urgent thing that we need to look at. We need to look at these decisions. We talk about the Akayesu case, but we are preaching to ourselves. We are preaching to the converted. If you stop the average person on the street and ask them, do you know about the Akayesu case? They do not know. But we do know about the Akayesu case. We do know that that was the first genocide conviction. But even those who know, quite a number of people don't even know what decision informed that Akayesu case becoming the first conviction for genocide. We must unpack those verdicts. We must take them out of courtrooms. We must put them in classrooms. Young people everywhere need to be able to say, this is how a genocide happens. This is how a genocide is determined in a court of law. This is what informed the Akayesu case, and this is what Akayesu did. And we need to do that often and say that so many times. So I would like to end by saying that this year, I spoke about the first Kwibuka when I joined the UN, concentrating on naming the crime, and that the second Kwibuka, I was concentrating on genocide denial. And making people know what arguments genocide deniers have, and countering those arguments that they have, and also ensuring that people understood that hate speech has always informed the dehumanization, has always informed genocide. So this year, I'm concentrating on the fact that we do have quite a number of people, indicted people, and I'm speaking about Rwanda now, more than 1,000 indicted people are still living free. They are living free, and they are living in countries that are member states of the United Nations. And we've had quite a number of cases. Usually I put out a statement each time somebody is arrested. So I put out one for Fulgence Kayishema. He was one of the world's most wanted suspects of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. He was arrested in South Africa. And also I welcome the verdict in France, sentencing Philip Hategekimana to life imprisonment for the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity committed in Rwanda in 1994. And then, of course, we have another suspect who was arrested here in the United States. His name is Eric Nshimie. He was arrested in Ohio, United States, and is being accused of allegedly concealing his direct involvement in the killings of the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994. So we do know that my message, we do know that these people who are living free continue to propagate this genocide ideology, and how dangerous this ideology is passed from generation to generation. But we also know how court processes are actually schools in themselves. I was looking forward to the Kabuga trial. I was looking forward. We'd put together writers who are going to write out the case and then put it out as teaching material in classrooms. But then this Kabuga trial is not happening, despite the fact that he was at large for 26 years. And because the court has determined that he cannot stand trial because of his mental state. So my message for Kuibuka 30 has been a call to all member states to facilitate justice and not to impede it. And we do know that justice brings strong visibility on the facts that happened, and in turn it permits all of us to build defenses against the dangers of genocide and genocide denial. So it is upon us to respond to the call for prevention of genocide with every tool at our disposal. And so this is our commitment. This is my commitment. And everywhere I go, I try as much as possible to speak to people to get them to know that this commitment to protect people who've suffered genocide before, to protect those who would suffer genocide now, those who are dehumanized, is actually a call to protect ourselves. And that genocides are not things that happened in history. They are not things that only happened to the Tutsi and to the Bosniak Muslims or to the Jewish people. That genocides can happen to any one of us. Thank you very much once again for having me here.
We want to thank the UN Special Advisor for being with us this evening. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for sharing the many efforts that your office has undertaken and is currently taking to prevent genocide. And I agree with you. Even my nonprofit organization, Genocide Survivors Foundation, we focus on prevention because we understand that genocide is a crime that is preventable. We understand that it's not a crime that happens overnight or in a vacuum. It's a process, and within that process, there is always opportunities to intervene, which unfortunately is not what happened in 1994 when the genocide against the Tutsi was being committed. Today, the genocide against Tutsi is referred to in many circles as the preventable genocide because there were plenty of warnings, but there was no political will. And so we are here. So thank you for you and to your office for everything that you're doing to fight hate and extremism and hate speech and other things which make it possible for genocide to happen. Thank you also for your moral clarity surrounding, around the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. As I mentioned at the beginning, as the special advisor emphasized, denial is one of the biggest challenges that we are currently facing. We understand that it is a stage in the genocide process, but although we know that denial is part of the genocide process, it nevertheless does not make it less painful, or it does not minimize the devastating impact that denial has on survivors' lives. And you also know that denial, genocide denial, is counter to any prevention efforts. Denial only exists to sow seeds for future violence. So we now have the honor of having our Rwanda's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations, His Excellency Ernest Rwamucyo, who's going to be giving the closing remarks to tonight's program. I will encourage you to read his extensive bio to learn more about the extensive work that he has done, both prior to becoming a diplomat and also as a diplomat. But he recently joined us as ambassador to the UN, but prior to that, he served as Rwanda's ambassador to Japan, concurrently accredited to Malaysia and the Philippines and Thailand. And prior to that, he served as Rwanda's High Commissioner to India with simultaneous accreditation to Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. And he also has served as the High Commissioner, Rwanda's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland. At the beginning, when we started this program, I said that Rwanda has come a long way in rebuilding in the last 30 years since the genocide. As survivors, we are deeply grateful that we now have a country with a leadership that is committed to the peaceful coexistence of all Rwandans. When I speak about the genocide against the Tutsi, which I do quite often to students in schools, I always emphasize that leadership matters. Leadership matters a great deal when it comes to genocide prevention. Prior to the genocide, we had a leadership, a government that was committed to dividing its population along ethnic lines, that played ethnic identity-based politics in order to monopolize power. And since the genocide, Rwandans are thankful that we've had a leadership that is doing quite the opposite. That is, again, creating an environment where every Rwandan, Hutu, Tutsi, Twa, can live freely, can live with peace and security, can live without having to worry that they are going to be subject to murder simply because of their ethnicity. So we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from our ambassador, who's going to be speaking about some of the steps that the government of Rwanda has taken over the last 30 years to make sure that what happened in 1994 will never happen again, as well, not only in Rwanda, but elsewhere in the world, because Rwanda has not only contributed to peaceful development in Rwanda, but has offered its support. They are part of the peacekeeping mission, even today in many parts of the continent. So we welcome you, Ambassador, to deliver your remarks, and we thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Jacqueline, for that kind introduction. Catherine Van Kampen, USG Nderitu, my sister. This has been a week where we've been meeting in many places and over this commemoration period. Thank you very much for standing with survivors and for being a voice of those who have been robbed everything, including their humanity. Genocide survivors, our panelists, and the audience. I have known Jacqueline and Console for quite a while, and I saw them as really very young ladies coming out of the shadows of a terrible tragedy that robbed them everything. And I've seen how resilient they've really been. Despite being robbed of everything, they've had so much to give, and they continue to give. They've rebuilt their lives, but they also supported other survivors and supported Rwanda as well. We admire their courage. I'm going to ask you to do something that normally we don't do, because this is a somber event, and normally during commemoration, we focus on the memory of the survivors, we focus on this tragedy of genocide, we focus on the resilience of the Rwandans. Usually, because it's a somber moment, we do not clap. But this evening, I really want to ask you to stand just for 1 minute, except for Jacqueline and Console. Jacqueline and Console can sit. You have the right to sit. The reason I ask you to really stand is so that we can give a wholehearted standing ovation to the courage of these two young ladies, which represent the courage of many Rwandan survivors of genocide. They've done so much, they've given so much, even sharing their story alone, as you saw, is not easy. I really want to give them a really standing ovation in recognition of their work, their courage, their resilience. Thank you. You may sit. Thank you for waiting for me to give you permission to sit. So, dear audience, we gather here united in remembrance of the over 1 million innocent lives brutally taken during those horrific 100 days of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. For a dreadful 100 days in 1994, the world watched as Rwanda descended into unimaginable violence and bloodshed. The genocide was a failure of humanity itself, a tragic reminder of the grave consequences of allowing hatred and divisionism to go unchecked. The memories of the genocide remain deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness, a stark reminder of our collective failure, one we must never forget, nor allow to ever happen again. As President Paul Kagame powerfully stated on 7th April, during Kwibuka 30, when we commemorated this genocide in Rwanda, he said, and I quote, "The genocide was a failure of the international community, whether from contempt or cowardice," end of quote. He highlighted the silence that accompanied Rwanda's descent into unspeakable violence. The seeds of divisionism and extremism which led to the genocide can happen anywhere if left unchecked. A strong warning that demands a strengthened global resolve to prevent such atrocities, not just in Rwanda, but across the world. Friends, while the trauma of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi can never be undone, Rwanda has demonstrated remarkable resilience in rising from the ashes. Our nation has rebuilt from devastation, embracing unity, accountability, and revival as the way forward for our country. Again, I want to quote President Kagame here, where he said that Rwanda was completely humbled by the magnitude of our loss, and the lessons we learn are engraved in blood. Yet, through the power of unity, accountability, and a visionary determination to forge a future beyond the shadows of genocide, Rwanda has risen from the ashes, becoming an outstanding example of what is possible when a nation chooses the path of reconciliation and renewal. In this light, I would like to commend the courage of our survivors, like Jacqueline here, and Console, and others here in the room, who share their deeply personal memories of survival and resilience. Their commitment to bearing witness to the horrors of genocide serves as a reminder of the immense human toll exacted by such atrocities and underscores the need to preserve their memory. Through their bravery, survivors illuminate the path towards healing and reconciliation, inspiring us to confront the shadows of our collective past with empathy and understanding. Their voices resonate as powerful beacons of hope, urging us to stand united against the specter of hatred and divisionism. Let me speak to what Rwanda is doing to ensure genocide never happens again. That is what I was asked specifically to speak about. Today, more than half of Rwandans are under the age of 30 and did not directly experience the horrors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. We therefore have a collective responsibility to transmit this memory to the next generation and to ensure that such unspeakable crimes never happen again. One crucial way we can fulfill this duty is through education. Since 2015, Rwanda has been developing an educational method for teachers to address the history of the genocide against the Tutsi with students in the classroom. And USG Nderutu talked a lot about taking this experience into the classroom so that we can educate another generation of youth and of citizens that are conscious of the dangers of hatred, of divisionism, of bigotry, of intolerance, of anti-Semitism, of any form of discrimination. By equipping the youth with knowledge and empowering them to be vigilant against hatred and divisionism, we can break the cycle of violence and build a more just, harmonious future. So this education and remembrance efforts are now set to take an even greater international dimension. In September 2023, 4 genocide memorials memorials against the Tutsi, for the memorials in honor of the genocide against the Tutsi, that's the Murambi Genocide Memorial, the Nyamata Memorial, Gisozi, and Bisesero memorials were inscribed on UNESCO World Heritage List. This historical recognition underlines the fact that the memory of the genocide against the Tutsi does not only engage Rwandans, it engages the entire international community. The inscription acknowledges the vital role these sites play in preserving memory, fostering national reconciliation, and explaining and transmitting this history to the next generation. Concretely, Rwanda has taken a conscious and determined effort to build a new nation that is democratic, that is united, accountable, and that embraces all citizens with a strong code of national unity and reconciliation. The following has been instrumental in the journey of Rwanda's transformation, and I'll go through them a little quickly in the interest of time. First was ownership and taking responsibility for the tragedy. When the tragedy happened of the genocide in 1994, we knew that the international community stood by and abandoned us. We knew that there was a history of colonialism that entrenched divisionism and hatred. We chose to ignore all this. We said this tragedy was caused by Rwandans who turned against fellow Rwandans. Rwandans were murdered by their neighbors, by their friends, by people they had known. So we had to own this tragedy as the starting point. So we decided not to blame anybody for it and decided to pick up the pieces and work towards owning this, cleaning up the mess, and rebuilding our country. We determined that whatever help is going to come should come to support us in what we've determined should be the way to build this new nation. And that's what we've been doing over the last 30 years. Second, through this process like Kwibuka, preserving the memory and remembrance, but while also preaching healing, resilience, reconciliation, and forgiveness. So when we remember, we are not consumed by sorrow and hatred. In Kinyarwanda, we say, Twibuke twiyubaka, that we should remember, but in remembrance, we should also rebuild our lives. We should rebuild our communities. We should rebuild our communities. We should rebuild our nation. We should be a resilient population that is going to stand on our own feet, pick up the pieces, and move on. So we should not be tied and held by sorrow and pain and hatred. So that has been a way for us to also rebuild and move. And that's why we had to celebrate the courage of these ladies, these survivors, and many others amongst us here, and millions of others in Rwanda. We've also had to build and invest in genocide memorials as a way of preserving the memory, so that future generations, as I said, can remember and can have a place where they can see the vivid reality of what happened in 1994. 3, we've chosen to focus on national unity and reconciliation by focusing on things that united Rwandans. The history of Rwanda, especially the colonial and immediate post-colonial history, was built on identifying things that divided Rwandans. We chose to ignore those and focus and eliminate things that united us, things that we shared in common. We removed things like the ethnic identity cards. We've started programs like Ndumunya Rwanda to reshape our identity as the Rwandans, as a united Rwandan. So this has been very, very important in us fostering unity and reconciliation. Even on the 4th point, where I'm going to talk about accountability and justice, when we thought of accountability and justice, the focus was to say that accountability and justice for the crime of genocide should help us rebuild the nation. It should not tear the nation apart. So we chose processes like the Gacaca, which is the restorative reconciliatory justice system, where the community was involved as a process of healing, as a process of facing the reality that we had, so that even the perpetrators could be given the opportunity to confess to what they did, to the crimes they committed, but with the view that if they were truly confessing and telling the truth of what happened, and that they showed real remorse, that they could be forgiven, that they could be reintegrated in society, that they could be brought back to work towards the rebuilding of the nation. So this has helped us also to move forward. So the way we handled accountability and justice, apart from the process that happened at the ICTR, what we did in the country through the Gacaca process and other methods was aimed at that. 5th is education and investing in people. We've invested heavily in the Rwandan people to improve both their quality and their outlook towards their nation. We've sent so many Rwandan children across the world to study so that they can come back enlightened with a broader world view, bring ideas of unity, of reconciliation, of innovation, of creativity, so that our society could be spurred forward. And that has helped us to move along. Building strong and functioning institutions of governance has been key. We wanted to build a new, democratic, inclusive society. And if you look at, if there is any country that have really carried out reforms, Rwanda has carried out really reforms from the post-colonial and institution that we inherited. We've really built first-rate institutions based on modern constitutional practices, modern legal practices, and we've really reformed and rebuilt institutions that will foster the development of our country and take it forward. We've implemented policies of devolution and decentralization to ensure that the bulk of our population can play a role in decision-making process. Inclusive and equitable development, wealth creation, and creating opportunities for Rwanda has been very, very important, because we want everyone to have a stake in this new country. That's been very, very important, that every Rwandan can see themselves as benefiting from this new Rwanda and being part of the process of its transformation. So we've created a lot of space for that. Women empowerment, youth engagement. Today, Rwanda has the largest number of women in decision-making position. The largest country with the largest number of women in parliament, but not just in parliament, in cabinet, in the judiciary, in local government institution. This is a cautious effort that we've taken to say that if we are to rebuild this country, all hands have to be on deck. Everybody has to be engaged. Everyone has to contribute. Nobody should be left behind. So that has been key for this process of moving forward. I think Jacqueline mentioned leadership. Leadership matters in every situation. I think Rwanda has been blessed. President Kagame is a visionary leader. He cares about the nation, he cares about the people, and he's really steered the nation to be ambitious, to be forward-looking, to be modernized, but to be inclusive, and to give every Rwandan space to contribute to the rebuilding of the country, and that has really helped us. But as I'm speaking at the Bar Association, I think most of the things that Rwanda has done, I think could also be things that you as lawyers, as members of the bar, can contribute to. For instance, the work that Rwanda did around Gacaca, bringing these cases, like the Akayezu case that USG Nderitu mentioned, I think this is where you can also contribute in terms of actually making people understand what happened in Rwanda, what it means for the global community, what it means for all of us, but also how to translate into the day life of how we behave when we walk on the street. We have a lot of challenges on, as we said, anti-Semitism, hate speech, discrimination of different forms. These are things that affect us on a day-to-day basis. And those are the beginning of a genocide. Those could be the beginning of atrocities that are unimaginable. So, through the genocide against the Tutsi, although the genocide against the Tutsi was put at the end in 1994 by the Rwandan Patriotic Army, perpetrators and genocide fugitives from the former genocide government of Rwanda and its army and militias are still large and around. There's still unmet issue of accountability. We have over 1,000 fugitives, genocide fugitives, who are in different parts of the world. USG Nderitu, one who was just arrested in the US just about a month ago or so. And there are others in other parts, North America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia. So we need to work towards ensuring that accountability. We still have the FDR, who are genocide militia, who committed genocide in Rwanda, crossed the border into DRC, in Congo, who are still perpetuating genocide ideology and are keen on continuing genocide. They are actually continuing a genocide across targeting Congolese Tutsi, as USG Nderitu mentioned. So we have a responsibility to stand up, to speak up wherever we see discrimination, whenever we see hatred, but also speak up for accountability to ensure that people who commit heinous crimes like this can be brought to account. They have to come to be brought in a court of law so that they can face, be accountable for the crimes they committed. And this is something that we can all contribute in our communities, or in our work, or in our professional lives, or in using any networks that we have to advocate for accountability. We owe it to the survivors, we owe it to all the victims to ensure that perpetrators are brought to book. I want to emphasize that the story of Rwanda holds significance for all of us, as it underscores the truth that the world is called to appreciate the value of life regardless of ethnicity, religion, or background. It also calls upon all nations to become signatories to the 1948 UN Convention on the Provision and the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and to live up to their obligations under this convention to fight and prosecute hate speech and crimes of genocide in their respective countries. I think this was something as lawyers you can also advocate for, that we can really question. I know that USG Nderitu has done a lot of work around this, and she was sharing with us the story of Zambia. I think there are quite a number of other countries, as you said, over 40 countries that have not yet ratified the convention, so we have to work towards that. Rwanda's experience continues to teach us the importance of taking proactive measures to protect people rather than waiting for external rescue or permission to do what is right. Everybody can play a role in one way or another. So in closing, I would like to bring your attention to President Kagame's words again. And here is what he said again on April 7th. The Rwandan story shows how much power human beings have within them. Whatever power you do have, you might as well use it to tell the truth and do what is right. It is this fundamental truth that must guide our relentless pursuit of a future where never again is more than a statement. It is a reality for all humanity. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rwamucyo, for your words. Thank you for your work and your part in the leadership that has gotten Rwanda to where it is today. As Ambassador Rwamucyo said, the majority of Rwandans today are children or Rwandans who were born after the genocide, who do not have the same memories that Consolee and I and other survivors here in the room have. So my hope, our hope, lies with this new generation of Rwandan. And we are deeply grateful, as I said, for the leadership that we've had, that these young Rwandans are growing up in a country whose leadership preaches unity and peaceful coexistence, who preaches peaceful coexistence among all Rwandans, who helps young Rwandans recognize that we are all Rwandans with the same basic rights to exist and to realize our goals and dreams. And this is in complete contradiction, as I said, to the government that we had prior to the genocide, which used identity politics to discriminate against Tutsis, to dehumanize them, to paint them as foreigners and invaders, and an enemy that needed to be eliminated. So I always say when I speak to, particularly to young people, and they ask me, do you think genocide will ever happen again in Rwanda? And I always say, part of my answer is always that as long as we continue to have leadership, again, that's committed to unity and peaceful coexistence, then Rwanda is going to continue to head in the right direction, because it's going to continue to head in the right direction. And as Ambassador mentioned, we owe this not only to the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, but we owe it to our children and our children's children to continue to make sure that this is a leadership that Rwanda is going to have moving forward. So thank you again for your remarks, Ambassador, and for being with us today. We recognize that we have kept you longer than we planned, so we thank you very much for your patience. I would like to end by just emphasizing what Ambassador Rwamucyo said, that really emphasizing the call to action, what Special Advisor mentioned earlier, that we recognize that although we're here to remember and to commemorate, as I said at the beginning, that we live here being committed to joining the prevention efforts, that we recognize that genocide doesn't have to happen. It's not an inevitable crime. And as lawyers, as other members who work in different sectors here, that we recognize our individual responsibility to join prevention efforts. As the Special Advisor mentioned, we have to understand that genocide is not only a problem that should concern the different communities who have been victims, Tutsis or Jewish people, the victims in Bosnia. It's a crime that can happen anywhere and to anyone, given the right conditions, as history has shown over and over again. So I hope that I invite you to remain engaged with, you have a number of resources in your programs. You have information for Genocide Survivors Foundation, the organization that I run here in New York City. You have information about the UN committee, which was part of the organizers for this event. You have the speakers here who have spoken. You have the permanent mission of Rwanda to the United Nations, which is here in New York City. So there's a lot of resources for you who want to be engaged, And I ask you again, this is my ask at the end, that you not only leave here feeling bad about what you heard, but you ask yourself, what can I do to contribute to prevention efforts and to create a world where nobody has to be targeted and murdered simply because of who they are. So we're going to conclude. I only ask for 5 minutes or less of your time, but we have a candle lighting ceremony that we have prepared. So we're going to conclude with that. And as you leave, we do invite you to have some food. We have a lot of food that we had prepared for you. And we thank you again for being with us as we commemorate for the 30th time the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And we hope that you come and be with us again, because talking about the genocide and being engaged in prevention efforts It's something that survivors, something that Rwanda, as a country that went through a genocide, that experienced genocide, something that we are committed to doing for as long as there is need to do it. So thank you again. I'm going to ask the person who's helping us with the AV to put on the song that's going to accompany the candlelighting ceremony. And we're going to have survivors. There are a few survivors here besides myself and Console who are going to light the candles. After that, we're going to invite our speakers who joined us this evening, our panelists and our honorary speakers to join us. And if there are candles left, we're going to invite anybody in the audience who may wish to light a candle in memory of the over a million innocent men, women, and children who were murdered during the 1994 genocide against Tutsi, but also to light a flame of hope, of prevention, of trying to make sure, again, that we can create a world where the basic rights of all human beings, the most basic of which is the right to life, can be respected. So thank you.
Inshuti muvandimwe icara unyumve, wowe dusangiye aka gahinda k'abacu twabuze tubakunze, bishwe bose nta gicumuro, ibyo urabizi simbikurusha. Ngaya amahiri ngiyi imihoro, tubura amahoro tubura gihoza, umuntu akibaza ibyabaye nta gisubizo azabibonera. Jya wibuka. Mfite ubwoba, mfite igihunga, impamvu yabyo ndayikubwira. Nuko ndeba benshi muri twe bameze nk'aho barangaye, maze bikazavamo kwibagirwa. Ko byaba ari ishyano se bagenzi, byaba ari igihemu ku bacu, jya wibuka. Kwiyibagiza ni ubupfu, ntabwo ari ubupfura gakondo. Ibyacu ni ibindi bishyashya, ntabwo siyasa twayisize ku mipaka maze dutahana andi matwara. Ibyo duhugiyemo ni bibi cyane, jya wibuka. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira, amajoro y'amaganya, ya mivu y'amaraso, ubwo abacu bashiraga. Ibuka. Ishyari ni ryinshi dufite itiku, turareguzwa turapfa imyanya, turacura ibinyoma bivamo impuha, ndabona cya ruswa cyotota, tutitonze twakiyoboka. Inda nini dufite yamize imbabazi, na ya mfubyi ntituyireba, urukundo rwimukiye uburyarya, reka turaryana nk'abatava inda imwe, mbese twabaye banga mwabo, mwoka byaramwe mugaheka. Dusubize amaso inyuma gatoya, ejo tudacana uwo twazimije, tujye twibuka. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira, amajoro y'amaganya, ya mivu y'amaraso, ubwo abacu bashiraga. Ibuka. Ngo ubuzima ni ukuri burakomeza, sinkubwiye ngo ujye mu buriri wiyorose uzahorote, iyo si yo nama nakugira. Ariko rero ibyo ukora byose, aho ujugurika umunsi nijoro ushaka ibintu n'amafaranga, jya ubikora wibuka abagiye, ntugategereze gusa uyu munsi. Kandi rero uhora uzi neza ko burya kutibuka ari ukuzima, maze wibuke. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira, amajoro y'amaganya, ya mivu y'amaraso, ubwo abacu bashiraga. Ibuka. Erega kwibuka si icyaha, ntabwo kwibuka ari inzika ihora itekereza guhora, ahubwo kwibuka byangombwa ku munyarwanda ugifite umutima, ni ukuzirikana ubudatuza, ni uguharanira ubutabera, ni uguhiga umugome aho ari, ngo ayo marorerwa ahere burundu. Tujye twibuka. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na
On behalf
gato.
of the New York City Bar Association, we would like to thank all of you for coming this evening. Our program is now concluded. Please help yourself to whatever food is remaining. And we, again, really want to thank you, and we hope that you all stay in touch with us so we can continue to do this work together. Thank you.